This is Reactor for the Atari 2600, and let me tell you a little story, a story about a game that was tucked away in the very back bottom right corner of my Atari 2600 collection. I played all the games around it, like Berserk, Frogger, Zaxxon, Mario Brothers, Combat, yet this one game remained untouched for years. Recently, after having reviewed all of those other big games that we all know and love, I decided to insert Reactor into my Atari 2600 Junior, turned it on, and immediately wanted to turn off the Atari, put the game back where it was, and never see it again. But I did not. I stuck with it. One of the challenges with being a video game reviewer is that occasionally you have to play video games that you don't like. And I did not immediately like Reactor. But that's because I didn't understand Reactor. This game does not look like much, but it is incredibly complex and highly addictive. If you don't have an evening or a long afternoon to kill, don't pick up this game. Let me explain what's going on here. This is like Inner Space meets a nuclear disaster movie. I'm piloting the blinking blue spaceship-like thing in the middle of the screen around the inside of a nuclear reactor. The thing in the middle that's expanding and contracting is the core, I think, and there's like a containment shield or force field around it in the earlier levels here. The things chasing me are enemy particles, and they're attracted to me. If they find me so interesting, I'd prefer it if they would just buy me a beer, but instead they want to run my spaceship into the side of the wall in the inside of a nuclear reactor and destroy me. Apparently the game is called Reactor because Fatal Attraction was already taken. Now that would be a good video game. Get extra points for boiling the rabbit the longest. Okay, back to the game. On the left and right side of the interior of this nuclear reactor are control rods. They're very, very small and they're difficult to see on screen, and you may not even be able to see them in this video review. But they're there, they're tiny, and you see them when you're playing the game. When I smack one of the particles into those control rods, you hear a beeping sound, a higher pitched sound than when you destroy one of the particles. The game uses sound very effectively, and you have to destroy those control rods in order to shrink the core. If you destroy the 4 control rods on the right or the left, the core shrinks back down to its original size. If you destroy both sets of control rods, you then get an extra decoy. There's a lot of pinball-like elements in this game when you actually think about it. I mentioned earlier that these particles are attracted to me, and they would be attracted to you as well if you were playing this video game. They're attracted to anybody in the role of spaceship inside nuclear reactor in Reactor. You can deploy decoys that will attract all of the particles away from you, and that's pretty handy. So you want to save your decoys for the later levels in the game when it gets much more challenging. And the trick is to drop off a decoy next to a whole bunch of control rods next to the wall. You destroy the enemy particles by running them into the interior walls, not the core or the core shield. So you drop off one of those decoys and a whole bunch of these things are hovering around it like fireflies or something. And they go and smack themselves into the wall, into the control rods, and you rack up a whole bunch of points. But the decoys only last a few seconds, so you have to use them sparingly. Another interesting pinball-like thing in this game is these additional rooms, or chambers, or whatever they're called. They're at the top of the screen here, and I'm setting a decoy next to one of them to attract a whole bunch of these particles and lure them into that room. Then they bounce around the inside of the room, and you get some additional points that way and get them out of your way as well. I'm impressed with how much they've packed into such a simple looking game with Reactor here. In the earlier part of the game, the core expands and contracts and is surrounded by a shield or something like that won't harm your ship, so it's difficult to see this on screen in the review, but there's some really interesting physics going on between these particles ramming your ship and you trying to ram the particles into the wall. It takes some getting used to. It's not an easy game to pick up and play, which is why my first reaction was like, I don't like this at all. But once you start playing it and realizing that this game is incredibly fun, you start to get the hang of how it actually plays, where you want to position your ship, how you want to fly around the core and get these guys to chase you and drop off decoys and smash them into the walls and get points. As the game progresses, it gets much more challenging because the particles themselves increase in size and mass. They're a bit heavier so they can knock your ship around a bit more. The shield around the exterior of the core goes away, and you're then left with an exposed nuclear reactor core, which we all know is a very bad thing. And if your ship flies into that, you're doomed. So you can't just rely on trying to hover around the inside of the, hover around the shield of the core. You have to actually dodge the expanding core and the particles and the wall. And the whole thing is very challenging. It's a really fun, exciting game, and a combination of an arcade-style video game and a strategy game. I think that Reactor is video game art in its purest, raw form, without any graphical enhancements. There's no catchy, commercialized cartoon heroes like Frogger or Dig Dug or Pac-Man or something. It's just you versus particles in a nuclear reactor. It's no wonder this isn't one of the more famous games out there today. Everybody still knows about Pac-Man. Perhaps they could have marketed Reactor in a similar way because it really is a fun game. They could have created a whole 1980s Saturday morning cartoon show called Reacty the Reactor. And it'd be like Gem and the Holograms. It'd be like Reacty and the Particles. They could be a rock group. And if the crowd got out of control, they could melt down and kill everybody with radiation. There could have been an entire generation of kids running around America with lunchboxes with nuclear reactors on them and plush toys of control rods. And the particles kind of look like marshmallows, so they could have easily spun off Reactor into a breakfast cereal just like they tried to do with Gremlins. After playing the game for several hours, and I'm glad that I took the time to get into it because it does not make a good first impression. You really have to figure out how to play this game, and then once you start seeing your score increasing each time you're playing it, you start getting the hang of it. And I could easily see myself getting addicted to this game in an evening and trying to get my score into the 6 digits. And it's a very rewarding game to play. I'm going to relocate it from that bottom right corner of my Atari 2600 collection down there in the shadows among the cobwebs and the trolls. And I'm going to take it and put it up front with other games like Yar's Revenge, Space Cavern, and Berserk. Reactor deserves to be in your Atari 2600 collection, and hopefully after watching this review you'll run out and find a copy. I can't imagine this cartridge costs more than just a few dollars, if that, because nobody took the time to create a popular line of nuclear reactor-based action figures. Wouldn't that have been the best cartoon? You could have just seen Frogger hanging out with Donkey Kong and Ms. Pac-Man, and they're solving some kind of mystery or going on an adventure together. And they look at each other and they're like, "Hey, where's Reacty the Reactor?" And Donkey Kong's head would sink and he would look down at the ground and say in a woeful voice, "Well, we don't really like to play with Reacty the Reactor anymore. For one thing, he's too smart and pompous and can finish the Rubik's Cube in 20 seconds. And also, last weekend, Qbert was hanging out with him and caught radiation sickness."